Was there something that was confusing? Fascinating. Great. Great. Okay. So, well, let's start, lying on the side. Okay, so we've been doing a lot of this action, yes, bringing the hand below the kneecap and exploring the movement of the knee upwards and downwards. Yeah, he's relaxing his jaw, softening his jaw, letting go of unnecessary effort. So for some people, their arms don't feel long enough. Anyone have that experience? So what sort of things, what sort of relationships can help lengthen our arm in space? Chelsea?
I found it hard to do that movement to start with, but I found just lifting my knee like that much and my arm could go over my hip a lot easier.
So you're talking about when we were holding the leg?
Yes.
And going...
Oh, backwards, sorry.
Backwards and forwards.
Yeah, it took me a minute to figure that one out.
So what Chelsea's saying is she discovered that the movement, holding the leg in a different place, can facilitate or evoke the movement of the shoulder blade, kind of like a bit like what Lockie was just doing, over the ribs to enable the leg to move forwards and backwards.
Yeah, I just had to have my knees a bit further apart.
Yes. So I did keep repeating that instruction. Lift your knee away from the floor. Have your knee at the same height as your foot, because if your knee is down there, then you've got this little mountain curve that you've got to come up and over, which isn't so easy. But if you lift your knee, then your shoulder girdle is more able to assist that movement backwards. So what did that evoke, this movement? If you think of what was happening through the torso. Alison?
You could start to use your spine more to bend it, in that case, backwards. I don't think this is on, but anyway, I'll just... backwards.
Backwards, yes.
Because what I was going to say for me was not so much that one, Chelsea, but later on when we were getting to the point where we could
I'm
roll.
having trouble hearing her.
I don't think I'm on. Do you think I'm on? No. I'll try again. That's better, isn't it?
It's a bit better.
Sorry, what I was going to say was it was then subsequently when we were using our clock, and then rolling, was actually releasing the spine in the other direction.
In the other direction.
Yeah, so it was being able to do this that then helped.
Okay.
And that was often with your hand closer to your knee.
Your knee, yes. So in this variation, where you're moving your knee a little bit through the hours of the vertical clock, okay, if you keep your spine in one line, it's very difficult to control the rolling. So what I'm understanding you're saying, Alison, is that when you brought your knee higher and were moving it this way, you started to fold through your spine. So it's bringing the pelvis and the ribs together and flattening the lumbar spine. And if you think of many of the variations that we've done in this week, well, we did this rolling onto the back and feeling how one side lengthened and the other side could shorten and bring us back. back onto the side. So okay, so using the distal, the arm and the leg, sweeping in space to roll you back onto the side, where one side is folding first, and then as the weight comes more and more onto that side, the upper side's lengthening, and that combination helps you roll, and then fold again. Okay, so the back can round again.
Including your head.
Pardon?
Including your head. So
yes.
You're bringing your nose towards your knee was an important instruction for us.
And we've also we did lots of variations where the hand was behind the head, holding the knee. And lifting and rolling. And so can you see that when you're lifting your head with your knee like this, it's encouraging, I'm doing well this morning, encouraging the folding in the front, the rounding of your lower back. Yeah? Anyone, any ideas? When you lift your head? Bending towards your spine, down and in. So there's a sliding movement of your spine. So in folding, when you lift your head, you're activating your abdominal muscles, which attach up on the ribs to the middle of your thorax, and they can act to draw your ribs downwards, which pulls your sternum with it. So it can be a sliding, and it's two-directional. It's that way as well as that way.
So
downwards, and so downwards towards the feet, yes, and downwards towards the floor.
Oh, that's all I wanted to.
Depressing the scapula sternum is another word for describing it. So if you're however you are right now, if you put your hands on your sternum and think about lowering your head and see if you can notice that your sternum slides downwards and feel what's happening through the back of you when you do that. Does it invite your back to go backwards and round? Yes? Now, some of us have an easier time with that than others. So if your extensors are strongly contracted and habitually kind of holding you up and keeping you going, that takes time and many ATMs and many different directions to learn how to use yourself differently to get that. But that's the idea. So you're listening for that.
Can I ask one more question?
Please.
You gave the instruction about the foot to the floor. So do you mean so you're getting that lengthening? So is that what, you know what I'm trying to say?
Mm-hmm. I think I know what you're trying to say. So we did it with both the leg standing and the leg long.
Yeah.
And then we did it without the hand behind the head. And it's the sole of the foot heading towards the floor. Yeah. So you have to activate the extensors of the hip, but what's happening through the skeleton is that because your hand is connected here, it's creating this forward movement of the length of the arm, which is pulling the shoulder. Maybe I should do it on that side so you can see. Which draws the humerus, which is connected to the shoulder blade and the clavicle, and then it starts to influence how you're organized in your thorax. But what happens if you start to effort? We may recall yesterday we said keep your shoulder blade pressed, and you felt then that it was two different directions. The effort to nothing gave. So we're looking for how can we find and discover the places that resist cooperating with this action. So we also, as a auxiliary movement, you've heard of that? Auxiliary movement is something which assists our nervous system in a particular pattern to help find a sensation or a relative relationship that once we've found it, we may not need it anymore. So if the arm is being drawn downwards as the foot goes down, if we lift the head with the help of the hand, it activates the abdominals, which can mobilize the thorax in this direction. So we would call the lifting of the head in that example an auxiliary movement, where it helps create a shift in weight, facilitates, yes. And then you can, without the hand, you may find that your neck can begin to arch a little bit and still evoke this softening of the chest and downward movement of the sternum in order for the foot to, the action is the foot moving downwards, but it's the link through the skeleton.
That's what I thought it was, but I was, I have to say I was struggling to follow. I was struggling to follow the language, your instructions, and process everything that's going on in the body as well.
Yes, it is learning a new language, and you have your own organisation, and the directions in ATM are a guide that you're constantly using to compare and contrast to what you're actually doing. So they can help you. Of course, sometimes they confuse you. One of the confusions that was noted yesterday was where is up and where is down, where's forward when I'm in a different orientation. So we use the terminology relative to ourselves. So up is always relative in a standing position. If we were standing up, the space is up above our head. Down is down the direction of below our feet. So Jenny kindly brought in these little, what do you call them, Jenny, these things? Pictures, yes, pictures. So what do you think about this? Talking about the hands being above. Can you make sense of the hands being above? So they're above relative, they're not actually above the head. But if we, pardon? Well, that's not above your head, that's below. You could say here it's below my head. If it's out there, then it's in the direction, which is why often we say in the direction or toward, because it's not a point. Up is not a point. Down is not a point. There's upness. That's up. If I want to say below my pelvis, that's more specific. It's more localized. But if I want to say take my hand to the left, well, where to the left? So there's this whole field of space that relative to myself is to my left. And when you're, and the feet are below the head, but they're not always below the head in relative position. So there are some ATMs when your feet are on the floor above your head. If you were lying on your back and we're doing something like a shoulder stand. Whoops. The feet are above the head. So often when there's it could be interpreted in several different ways. We'll give multiple references. So forward is in the direction of your nose. Backward, we talk about the back of the head. behind you. So when we were doing this movement of taking the leg behind, talking about the sole of the foot coming towards the back of the head. So the sole of the foot was moving backwards relative to the front of yourself and in the direction of the back of your head, which was also moving backwards. Orientation has directions in it. So I'm orientated forwards and to you. We can talk about orientation of a part. My pelvis is oriented, it could be neutral. Now, my pelvis is oriented backwards because we talk about the top of the pelvis, unless we name the sit bones or some other part to give it a direction. Sit bones. You could, backwards. Backwards. I'm taking my pelvis forwards.
Your sacral
backwards, yes, you could take your sacrum backwards.
Your sit bones are forward.
Coming forwards.
And the pubis also forward. Up.
Right now, I'm tilting my pelvis backwards. The top of my pelvis. So we talk about the top is the usual reference point for direction, unless it's stated otherwise. We can talk about a pubic bone moving towards our navel, our belly button. So if you think about your pubic bone is coming forwards and upwards. So forwards in space relative to yourself and upwards relative to the standing orientation, being up, down, left, right. But what's fascinating is when we're in these exploring in an ATM and it's an unusual configuration, it's very easy to lose your sense of self for a moment because it's something that's unfamiliar. So we use the references to learn where we are and where we're moving to find out about ourselves. Can be that, so in this, where we were holding the knee, and moving the knee forwards and downwards. Okay, but we were discovering what that evokes through the skeleton and what you can do with what can happen with your head. Remember that? And that if there is no unnecessary work going on in the muscles of your neck, then it's possible that the movement through the arm that's it. Pulls through the shoulder girdle, and because of the connection with the sternum, which is linked to the ribs, the thoracic vertebra, there can be a lifting or a turning in this region that passes through to the head. So if the head is passive or quiet, the head can be pulled, so it can be lifted away from the floor through the connection through the skeleton. If you actively lift it, then you're engaging the muscles of your neck. That's okay, but is it necessary? Maybe not. And so here we're looking for what happens, and many of you are beginning to find that there's this transition through space that's really quite sophisticated because you've got this movement happening in your upper hip joint, in your lower hip joint. You've got a changing relationship with the ground. Your weight is shifting. You've got the motion being transmitted through your skeleton and evoking something up here. And if the head is, if our musculature can be disengaged, the head has a weight. So rather than lift to begin with, it's going to hang, and this region can be lifted. It's a bit hard to show. And the head does this very interesting movement where through the force coming through the skeleton, it can roll a little bit and maybe even slide a little bit, translate forwards, rather than lifting. Yep, got one here first.
Yeah, I experienced that. Noticing when my shoulder could let go, because originally it was almost holding on to my knee in terms of holding on to, to keep up with it.
So pulling this way?
Yeah, there was like a force of keeping it there and letting the knee pull it. And when I actually started reaching with the knee, this started unlocking, and then I could actually start rolling. So,
Would you like to show us? Would you mind? Because it could be really useful to see.
Oh, I guess so, yeah.
So we'll see how it happens this morning. Yeah, maybe lie on that blue mat.
Oh, me doing it?
Yeah.
Sure.
So hold your knee and lift your knee away from the other leg. And then begin to move your knee downwards and away from your head. Okay, what about if you put your right arm out in front of you now? So that's one direction. So when you see movement happening, it's happening in space, and there's often, you can see a spatial intention. So we're seeing a pathway here of his movement. You can think of it as he's telling us what he's thinking. He's thinking up and then that away. And I'm going to put your right arm a little bit more downwards. Slide your right arm there. You're forwards. Oh, you're forwards. Is it? Okay, hold this knee. Okay. So now what about if we keep thinking downwards away from your head? Okay, that's not easy yet. So it's easier for Lockie to go the path that's easier for you and see if you can. There. Okay, so now we're going to do that again in slow motion, because this is where some of the really interesting things happen that's so difficult for us if we're used to the strength in our arms or working in our neck. Yes. So see there? That's it. The thoracic spine are turning. There. So it's a sequential motion that can get easier and easier because you're using the body segments to facilitate that pathway in space. Yes, that's possible. Yes. Scary? Because most of us, the neck is a very mobile region, and we're used to using it a lot, so we lose those little differentiations. And one of the things Moshe spends a bit of time for in this lesson, so just rest a minute, okay, is can you put your right hand under your head? So lie on it, yep. Now, lift your head directly sideways. Do you remember we explored this? Looking at how much work happens in the neck was part of it, but also it was to activate this. We did it with the hand over the head. But in actual fact, can you now think of finding an easier direction of lifting your head? So let your head roll a little forwards. Okay, so let's roll and lift. There. And come back. There. Do you feel any difference? Doesn't feel, okay, lift it sideways again. There. In actual fact, okay, don't use this. And now do the other way. But that's what we were looking for when that most people will try and lift with their neck. And the neck muscles, they can do that. They can lift the weight of their head, particularly when they're supported with this action down here. Yeah, because it's something happening in your chest, but that's okay. So I was looking to find a little bit more differentiation of the head on the cervical spine and of this region, particularly the upper thoracic vertebra, which with most people don't have the flexibility that's possible, and the lower cervical vertebra. Where's the box?
If the idea is to lift the head and to don't use too much this muscle, it's just to round a little to this kind of spiral. When you tell us lift your head, our interpretation is lift our head in that.
We were exploring that specifically, so
okay.
you could recognize what lifting the head is. But does the head? So we explore all the components.
Was part of the exploration, the whole exploration, to then do the other, arrive to the other way.
Yes. So we're trying to differentiate different parts of this action in order to find a coordination of the whole body in a way where the head doesn't need to be lifted at all. It is lifted through the action of the body segments through space, which is what you can you do it again for us, Lockie? Hold your knee. Yep. Put your other hand by down near the other knee. Yep. And find the pathway where you can roll to set. So you see, he's not lifted. His head is being lifted through the changing relationship of the rest of his skeleton.
Stephanie, have everything we've been doing this week kind of building up to that?
Can you see the connections? Yeah, great. That's
when we did yesterday, the last thing I did before I left, it was this, about lifting the head from one side. In myself, I found it a little bit easy if I press this side on the floor. So the head is not really doing nothing, or the neck muscles. It was more about organizing the upper body and the breathing in such a way that it's coming. It's coming up. It's not, it's lifting. It's not.
Great. So that little instruction of pressing the ribs and feeling if that makes a difference to you lifting your head is highlighting, making distinctions around different parts of yourself that may or may not be in your self-image or in your image of that action. And for some people, that instruction will make a big difference. And for other people, something else will make a big difference. That's great that you discovered that.
When we watched Lockie do that and everyone went, wow, it looked as though his head was like a counterweight that was needing to roll a certain trajectory in order to then lead to its lifting up.
No, I think I should on the skeleton. You could think, I guess you could think of it as a counterweight, but
or perhaps rather than a counterweight, a momentum creator that
and
lifted his thorax.
And it could be. It's a fishing net. That's caught Bono. Let's see if I can do it. Him in that position. So if we think that you've had a few talks about easy action or efficient action and how it involves the whole body. And there are many biomechanic principles that can come into play, different weight in different actions. But we have a torso and we have a spine to which the head is connected. If the action is being elicited anywhere, we're looking at how it brings the rest of the self in. So it's a weight on the other end of the spine, and if somebody is holding their head there, then it's going to counter the direction that they're going to be moving in. But if they can allow to disengage the work in the neck, then the movement of the head through space occurs as a consequence or with very minor movement of the pelvis and spine and thorax. Mm-hmm. Yes. So well-organized movement usually does feel delicious and pleasurable. Where's the box?
It felt like this big kind of sweeping, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So there's and you saw that with Lockie, that movement happens in space, and sometimes we make a movement that is more of a linear or in one plane, like this upwards and downwards movement of the knee. But here, you're moving through multiple planes, and you could think, what pathway is the head taking through space? What pathway is the knee taking through space?
It's a bit disorientating too, because the head's like, yeah.
It is to begin with, because it's, if you haven't explored these movements through space for a while, your vestibular system is getting a whole lot of stimulation as it changes, your head changes orientation, as it speeds up, constantly you're adjusting. Okay. Any other questions? Colour? Hiding. And we've got a couple more lessons to go in this series, because in order to evoke possibilities that we are capable of can take time when we've got so many habits of, holding ourselves in working in set relationships. Mm-hmm.
Without the use of the knee, without the use of the arm on the knee, but we were also sort of sweeping up to sitting one way and sweeping up to sitting the other way. And for me, a lot of the lessons of what your head does to help you do that were very translatable to this one.
And you will discover that in the training program, the lessons are woven together in a way that you'll revisit different patterns of movement, and you get more and more information about yourself, and then you visit them again and weave them into others. And that's an absolute theme. Okay, well, let's just take a 5-minute water out break, less than, and then we'll do some ATM.